Before we get into today's show, I want to tell you about a new offering from MD Coaches. Group coaching for physicians is a small, virtual, confidential cohort designed to inspire participants to rediscover personal and professional fulfillment. The next cohort begins on Thursday, October 6th, and runs weekly until November 10th. And you can earn 1 CME credit per session, totaling 6 credits in all. To learn more and to register, visit www.mdcoaches.store. Space is limited, so be sure and register today.
I think as soon as we men realize there's a lot in this for us, we're going to get over the idea that, anything related to gender doesn't include us.
Paging Dr. Cook. Paging Dr. Cook. Dr. Cook, you're wanted in the OR. Dr. Cook, you're wanted in the OR.
Welcome to the Prescription for Success podcast with your host, Dr. Randy Cook.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Prescription for Success. I'm Dr. Randy Cook, your host for the podcast, which is a production of MD Coaches, providing leadership and executive coaching for physicians by physicians to overcome burnout, transition your career, develop as a leader, or whatever your goal might be. Visit MD Coaches on the web at mymdcoaches.com because you're not in this alone. And don't forget, CME credit is available when you listen with us. Just look for CMify in the show notes to learn how. My guest today is a professor of psychology in the Department of Leadership, Ethics, and Law at the United States Naval Academy, also a clinical faculty associate at Johns Hopkins University. His most recent book is titled Athena Rising: How and Why Men Should Mentor Women. So, let's hear my conversation with Dr. Brad Johnson. So we're taking a little bit of a different tack in Prescriptions for Success today. Typically, we speak to physicians on the show, but as the regular listeners will attest, we do from time to time speak to some non-physicians that have a significant impact on the physician community, and that's exactly what we have today. This time we have an honest-to-goodness, a real doctor, Dr. Brad Johnson. Brad, thanks so much for joining us today. It's great to have you.
Great to be here, Randy. Thank you.
Well, I'm looking forward to the conversation, and as is always the case, Brad, we want to get a feel for your beginnings. So let's start off with, at about what age did you develop an interest in becoming a psychologist?
That's a great question. I suppose that it stretches back to my maybe even pre-undergrad, because my father, as it turns out, was a psychologist. He was an experimental psychologist and a college professor. And I grew up in a family where, I had a mother who was a professional licensed counselor. My dad, later in his career, became licensed as a psychologist, was kind of grandfathered in. And so I had the opportunity to observe two parents engaged in different kinds of clinical counseling work as a young person growing up. And then as an undergrad, really found psychology incredibly intriguing. I changed my major several times.
Well, I was just going to ask you, so I was interested, your undergrad degree is a BA, and yet it's in the sciences. So at the time that you started your undergrad work, you were undecided at that point. Is that correct?
I was undecided, yeah. And I think I began religious studies and went to sociology, and just, I didn't find those things quite rigorous enough, and ended up taking more psych courses. And, I had the opportunity to have my father, believe it or not, for a course or two. So, because I went to the college where my dad was a prof, and and then, ended up deciding clinical psych really was kind of the thing for me. And so, yeah, that's how it all began.
And you actually did your graduate school at a theological seminary, is that correct?
I did, yeah. Fuller Theological Seminary was.
And were you considering ministry at the time, or was it just a good place to go to school?
I was not. It was just a terrific Ph.D. program in clinical psychology. It had been accredited back in the 70s by the American Psychological Association. I think one of only two programs that were actually housed in seminaries. And, just given my family history, that was a good place for me to begin just culturally. And, interestingly, Randy, I had to get a master's degree in theology along the way. So it ended up taking me 6 years to wrap up my doctorate in clinical psych. And then, as we do in clinical psych, residency comes next, and I ended up deciding after 6 years of this, I am ready for something radically different. and got lured by the opportunities the military residencies provided in clinical psychology and said, that sounds like just the recipe for getting restored a little bit. And ended up going to officer indoctrination school for the Navy and ending up at Bethesda Naval Hospital for my residency, and had a terrific training experience there, and then did my 3 years postdoctoral to kind of pay back my residency at Pearl Harbor, the medical clinic there. And again, terrific experience for me.
Yeah, I bet it was. So I know that eventually you got a faculty appointment at the U.S. Naval Academy, which we're going to talk about some more in a moment. But what were you doing in the meantime prior to your arrival at the Naval Academy?
Yeah, so I had a 4-year interlude. I left the Navy after 4 years and ended up at George Fox University in Oregon. Again, rather small school with a doctoral program in clinical psych, and was on faculty there for 4 years. So, got to get a taste of teaching at the graduate level. And then out of the blue comes a call from a couple of colleagues at the Naval Academy who said, "Brad, we have a job here that has your name written all over it."
So they found you.
They found me. These were a couple of, one was a postdoc person that I had supervised in Hawaii, and one was my own military mentor, a woman named Betsy Home, and I'll circle back to her later in our conversation. But Betsy and Rocky reached out and said, "Hey, we're looking for a clinical psychologist to come on faculty here and really help us up our game in the behavioral sciences. This is a leadership focused institution, and we really would love it if we could pull somebody in who's got a military background. So in many ways, you're a perfect fit." And I applied, and one thing led to another. And 22 years later, I really count myself fortunate for ending up in Annapolis.
Well, now I'm intrigued by that progression of events, and I have to ask, and we're going to get more into your writing in detail in just a moment. But you do have a significant interest in gender equity or gender inequity. And I'm thinking that at about the time that you were recruited to the Naval Academy, this was about the time that, or not long after the time that women became eligible to matriculate into the military schools. Do you think that might have had influenced the decision for them to recruit you?
That's really interesting. I think that because Betsy, my own mentor, was involved in the selection process, I would like to think that her awareness of my more perhaps egalitarian view of men and women in the workplace may have factored in, to her thinking I might be a good fit. But by the time I think the first class at all service academies in the U.S. that were mixed gender graduated in 1980, and I arrived there 18 years later, 98. So by the time I arrived, women were more integrated in. I think we had about 16% women at the Naval Academy my first year. Now we're pushing closer to 38-40%, believe it or not. So over the course of my time at Annapolis, I've really seen a sea change. We have a lot of work to do still when it comes to genuine equity, but I've seen the progress. It's been rewarding.
Well, tell me a little bit about that. Can you point to some examples of how things changed in the years that you've been there with respect to gender equity?
Yeah, well, and I think there are different elements to this. I mean, number one, with any minoritized group, in this case, women, in the early years of integration, it is always incredibly challenging. There's pushback, there's opposition, there's harassment like you wouldn't believe, and people have a hard time, especially the majority group. In this case, mostly white men have a tough time with change, right? There's this kind of zero-sum thinking. If we give up something, women are going to gain at the expense
the camel
of
gets
men.
his nose in the tent, right?
Yeah, right. So I think those intrepid women in the first decade of integration really have some battle scars, right, from that really difficult
I bet they
experience. There's a sense I've heard from women in those classes that there was a sense we couldn't even get together and talk, right? You couldn't have any community of women because you were so stigmatized already. You didn't want to identify with other women. So it was a very isolating experience for those early women going through that. What we find, of course, in psychology, social psychology in particular, is that attitudes change with mere exposure, right? The more those men over the years had exposure to women, realized they're terrific colleagues, they're just like everybody else, they bring some perspective that we didn't have before. And by the way, as I get to know them, they become some of my best friends. That just happens. Mere exposure, my attitudes change, prejudice, discrimination, all of those things begin to change. So that's an issue just of time and exposure. But the other element here is that over, those 2-3 decades, Congress has slowly changed federal law so that more combat specialties have opened up to women. I think, in the last couple of years, we finally eliminated all barriers to all different areas of combat. As that's happened, women are no longer really stigmatized in terms of being very limited in what they can do in the military. Now they can attempt to enter anything, including special forces. So I think it's both. It's been change in law and then change in attitude just through flat out exposure.
So it sounds like you think the military has made a pretty good adjustment, but I wonder if you even have enough data to have an opinion on the same question with respect to practice of medicine. There's been considerable gender prejudice in that area for a very long time. We continue to have some struggles with that, but what do you think?
I think that medicine, like a lot of professions, is really got a long way to go. And I wouldn't single out medicine. And by the way, just for context, these comments come from a lot of work with women in medicine, with the Harvard leadership course on women in leadership, and with my colleague Dave Smith, my co-author. We do an awful lot of speaking to medical organizations, med schools, hospitals. And the feedback that we get, of course, from women on the ground is that they experience a lot of headwinds related to gender, and this relates to lack of opportunities for promotion. It relates to pay disparities. It relates to constant sexism and harassment in the workplace. I don't have any data to suggest medicine is in a worse place than finance or tech or law. I have a suspicion that you're not. But if you just let's look at the data on women advancing to leadership, now we have more than 50% of med students who are women. And yet when you look at deans, when you look at full professors in medical schools, we're at a quarter or less still. So the representation in medicine is not translating to leadership. And that's, for me, is always a signal that there are some obstacles, there are some things going on that make it tough for women to feel like they have a way forward.
And I'm wondering if you have an opinion on something that we see pointed out fairly frequently when we're having the discussion about medical practice, and that is, if you look at the figures amongst those that graduate from medical school, the percentage of women that stay in it up until retirement age is dramatically less than what you see amongst men. So I'm interested to know if you have observed that in other professions as well, particularly in the military, and if so, what is the reason for that? Why can't women feel like they truly want to make this a lifetime commitment?
There's so many layers here, and I first of all, let me just answer the military question. I think yes, and it's not just the military, but I think what you see in medicine with lack of representation at the higher levels of leadership. Exactly what we see in the military. So after that 5-year commitment of payback service for people who graduate from the service academies, we find far fewer women continuing their service. So some of the ingredients we see here: number one, women really not seeing that there's genuinely a path for them to have a family if they're choosing to do that, while also advancing in their career. There's a sense that I have to choose. I hear this from military women all the time. I can't have both. Or there's a sense that, boy, I just don't want to continue battling the headwinds, the stigma. Hey, we don't see many women in these professions. So there's a sense that if I don't see myself, I don't see a way forward for myself. So lack of role modeling, lack of senior women already there who can, offer kind of guideposts, both in the military and in medicine, about how I might do that. There's also harassment and discrimination, and, women get the message that they perhaps don't belong. And I think you probably see this in the medicine field in different subspecialties where there are far fewer women. There's a sense that if I enter that profession, I'm a bit of a unicorn, right? And I get those messages. So then I begin to feel like an imposter. I really don't belong here. And, I'm just not going to continue in a space where I don't feel welcomed or that there's a way forward for me. But to your point, Randy, medicine is absolutely not exclusive in this area. And you're right. We face this in the military. The problem that we are running into in the military, and I would predict that you're facing this in medicine, we're going to break the system if we don't fix this. Because here's what's happening. We're graduating more and more women, which is terrific. But if they don't stay, we're going to break the system. There won't be enough pilots. There won't be enough officers. We're going to not have enough people. So we've somehow got to solve this perception that you can't enjoy your career and have space for family. And there's one other strand here, but maybe I'll let you chime in, that I think is really an important message for men.
Well, in that regard, what I think I want to do is let's start to talk about some of your books, and particularly your latest book. You got 17 of them, by the way, 17 books and research articles, too numerous to count. By the way, here's something that you might appreciate. I made the mistake. I was going to print out your CV earlier today before I really looked at the entire volume. And when we got done, my printer had given me 45 pages. So that says something about the research articles and papers that you have. So that just to underscore how well published you are. But your latest book, it's called Good Guys: How Men Can Become Better Allies for Women in the Workplace. So let's just begin with when we look at all the things that you've published on this subject, and in addition to a number of other really fabulous books, how did you and David decide that this was going to be the subject for you to tackle at this particular point?
I will just tell you briefly our kind of my story on this. I've spent my entire career, as you see, looking through my research on mentoring relationships, and really with a deep curiosity about what mentoring looks like behaviorally when it's done really well from the perspective of mentees. What do mentees say they most appreciate? What are the behaviors and attitudes of really effective mentors? That's really captivated me for most of my career. And then about 10 years ago, my sociology colleague, David Smith, comes along, and all his research was in gender, work, and family. We were both former naval officers with an interest in one specific aspect of this research, and it was what keeps men on the sidelines, right? We're looking at all the data showing women get less mentorship, they get less sponsorship. We see all the evidence showing men are uncomfortable engaging with women in the workplace, which, by the way, got deeply exacerbated by the Me Too movement. And we wondered, what is it that keeps men from engaging? Because this is really the secret ingredient to getting more rapidly to gender equity in the workplace. If we're relying just on women, and we've already talked today about the fact that there are fewer women in senior leadership, if we rely on them to do all the mentoring of the talented junior women coming into the pipeline, it's not going to work, right? And that's why the system is broken to some extent. If men are not engaging and mentoring and sponsoring equally, we're simply not ever going to get to real equity. So that was a challenge for us. That was kind of the beginning. Personally, we also have women that we care about in our lives, that we, have parallel careers with. In Dave's case, his wife was a naval officer. In my case, my only sibling is a sister who's also a very senior naval officer. So we've had this opportunity to hear from these women we care about the headwinds and the obstacles and the things that they encounter daily that neither David or I ever encountered, just simply based on our gender. And I think that has piqued some empathy for us about this work. So kind of combination of the academic interest and the personal case for us.
I guess the next question is, do you think men are adequately equipped to serve appropriately as mentors for women? Do they have the background and the appreciation of the female experience, if you will, to really be able to be an effective mentor?
Yeah, there's so much in that question, Randy. And I would say that men are somewhere on a continuum here, right? So we can't talk about men as a monolith. There are some men who I think are really well prepared. They feel confident. They feel competent in terms of how to show up in cross-gender mentorships. And there are a lot of other men on the farther end of the spectrum, the other direction, who just are either anxious, they don't see it as their place, they have all kinds of biases about women. So for different reasons, they're not able or willing to engage. But can men do this? Absolutely. And I think a real irony here is that it's not about understanding everything about women's experiences. I don't think we can do that, but we can show up with a genuine humility and a learning orientation and an openness to learning about the experiences of women, an openness to learning about gender bias in the workplace and self-educating a bit, and then when we get to these actual relationships in the workplace, checking in with women that we care about, we're working with maybe as mentors, and just say, hey, I've been learning about this or reading about it. Has this been part of your experience? Would it be okay if I asked you about some of the things that you've encountered, just so I can be better and more aware and maybe more effective as a good colleague to you in the workplace? If I could show up with that kind of humility and openness and authenticity, I don't have to know everything about a woman's experience. I think she's more inclined to trust me and kind of walk along with me as I work to get better and learn how I can be a better mentor for her.
It's a very encouraging idea. Along those same lines, I'm really interested to know what do you think is the most difficult part of recruiting men to be mentors for women?
Yeah, and again, when Dave and I were doing the research for Athena Rising, our very first book, which is all about cross-gender mentoring, we found so many reasons men stay on the sidelines, Randy. We actually developed this term, reluctant male syndrome. Maybe it's going to be a diagnosis at some
Sounds like
point.
a good one.
There are so many elements here. I'll just mention a few. Anxiety. I was surprised in our research just how many men are anxious about this. I don't want to step in it. I don't want to make a mistake. I don't want to say the wrong thing. I feel really sensitive about that. Some men are afraid of rumors and gossip, right? If I'm spending time mentoring a junior woman, is there going to be talk? Is there going to be conversation about what's really going on? A lot of men have implicit biases that they're just not aware of around gender. So in psychology, there's this wonderful stream of research called the Women Are Wonderful effect. And essentially, you ask men, what do you think of women? And they say, oh, women are great. I love women. They're kind. They're gentle. They're caring. But what you don't hear is that women are competent. They're terrific leaders. They're ready for that next promotion. If I'm only thinking about women as caring and compassionate, it makes sense that I'm not going to lean into mentoring and sponsoring relationships. And then last thing I'll just say, I think Me Too exacerbated all of this, right? And this is no fault of women, of course, but men have come up with some false narratives about what Me Too is about. Me Too is simply about women asking to come to work and not be assaulted or harassed, really low bar for men to get over. But instead of that, the narrative has been that women are dangerous. They make false accusations. Simply not true. We've looked at the data. It's incredibly rare. So we've got to push back on the false narratives about not engaging. And last thing, I think a lot of men, frankly, even though their heart is in the right place about this, they want to be part of the solution. They just don't know what to do. So it's just a flat out tool or technique issue for some men.
I think that's a really good point that you bring up with respect to making the decision that you want to be part of the solution rather than part of the problem. I grew up in the South in the 50s and 60s. And of course, we were dealing with race at that time. And I understand that feeling of trepidation when it comes to walking up to someone whose culture and background and experiences you know nothing about and saying, can I help? What would be your advice on to someone who is standing in those shoes?
There are a lot of us in that place. And I'm glad you pulled race in here too, because I think a lot of the behaviors and the attitudes that lead to terrific allyship across gender apply very nicely to race and sexual orientation and other differences. I mean, if you just take things on the interpersonal side of terrific allyship, how do I show up and hold myself accountable in relationships? I mean, it includes things like listening generously and avoiding assumptions and making sure that these folks are included. Did they get invited to the meeting or the social event? It involves really passing the friend test, meaning that, this person would never hear something that I said about them behind their back that wasn't positive when they're not in the room. Those things are important when it comes to gender, but they're also important when it comes to other minoritized groups, like my Black colleagues or Black women specifically. So I think if I can master some of these in terms of the way I show up, with the openness, I think that's going to be very effective. And you asked maybe what would be a really great entree just to show that I'm open and would like to be part of this person's, network, maybe moving forward. I love the idea of the contextualized offer, so I don't want to go up to somebody and say, I'd like to mentor you, right? That's just awkward. But to say, hey, I've noticed some of the work that you've been doing, or I heard you give that talk the other day and I thought it was terrific. And I was thinking, wow, we were lucky to get you on board here. And I was just wondering, what do we need to do to keep you here? And, if you'd ever love to have a conversation about next steps or where you'd like to go in your career and how I might contribute, my door's open and I'd always be delighted just to chat with you about that. That kind of contextualized affirming offer, that's an easy lift. And most people are going to probably take you up on that.
Do you think that there are probably a great many more men that are capable of serving in that role than there are, but they're just holding themselves back because of the feeling of inadequacy?
I think so. I think a lot of men who are somewhere early on their ally, continuum experience or their journey really could be leaning into this. And I think, again, it's recognizing that this is something for me. And I love reframing this as, hey, this is not a women's thing. If you're a guy in medicine and you have some rank and you have some power, this is not, mentoring women or participating in a sponsorship program for talented junior women in your med school or your hospital. This is not a women's thing. It's not really just a gender thing. This is part of your leadership brand, right? This is part of how you show up as a male in the 21st century workplace, making sure that you've got an inclusive mindset, that you show up with humility and authenticity, that you actually hold yourself accountable to achieving targets on, pulling more women into leadership roles and having a part in that. This should just be part of your leadership brand. I think as soon as we men realize there's a lot in this for us, we're going to get over the idea that, anything related to gender doesn't include us.
Hi, I'm Rhonda Crow, founder and CEO for MD Coaches. Here on RX for Success, we interview a lot of great medical professionals on how they grew their careers, how they overcame challenges, and how they handle day-to-day work. I really hope you're getting a lot of great information. But if you're looking for an answer to a specific problem, management or administration challenge, or if you're feeling just a bit burnt out, like maybe you chose the wrong career, well, then there's a faster way to get the help you need. No, it's not counseling, it's coaching. RX for Success is produced by MD Coaches, a team of physicians who have been where you are. I know you're used to going it alone, but you don't have to. Get the support you need today. Visit us at mymdcoaches.com to schedule your complimentary consultation. Again, that's mymdcoaches.com, because you're not in this alone.
We'll get back to our interview in just a moment, but right now I want to tell you a little bit about Physician Outlook. If you haven't discovered this remarkable magazine, please do so very soon. It was created by physicians, for physicians, to showcase the intersection between clinical and non-clinical interests. Whether it's writing, painting, cooking, politics, and dozens of other topics, Physician Outlook gives a physician perspective. It's available online and in print. It's really unique among physician lifestyle magazines. And like the Prescription for Success podcast, Physician Outlook amplifies the voice of any physician who has something to say. It also engages patients who still believe in physician-led, team-based care. And Prescription for Success listeners can get 3 months free when you enter our promo code RX for Success and select the monthly option at checkout. That's a really great deal on this stunning publication. And now let's get back to today's interview. This is really an important topic in medicine today because of the numbers that you have referred to already, and it is absolutely critical that we do something to keep everybody that's trained in medicine for a reasonable period of time. If we don't do that, we've got a bad situation that's going to go much worse than it already is. You have written eloquently about the subject, Brad. The book is called Good Guys: How Men Can Become Better Allies for Women in the Workplace. I regret that I have not been able to read it yet, but I'm looking forward to it. I know it's going to be a great read, and I want to thank you for being with us today. But this is the point where I'm actually going to turn the program over to you. I'm going to close my mic, and Dr. Brad Johnson is going to give us his personal prescriptions for success.
Okay, I have been looking forward to this, and it's been a bit of a challenge to think of my, really terse and pithy prescriptions for success, but I'm going to try and go ahead and do it right now. So I have three things that I think I would pass along to an earlier iteration of myself and to junior colleagues that are maybe leaning into the earlier phase of their career. And I guess these are some nuggets that are sort of hard-earned for me. So number one, I encourage an earlier version of myself to embrace change in career trajectory. And I want to give context for this. So right out of grad school, after laboring for 6 years in a clinical psych Ph.D. program, and then 4 years of residency and postdoctoral work, I'm 10 years in now to my Ph.D. in clinical psych journey. And really, all of my work had been clinical for the most part. And I had a sense that that was my training. I need to become a practicing clinical psychologist. And here's what I began to notice. The thing that I really looked forward to during the day was if I had a cancellation. I loved it because I would immediately spend that 45 or 50 minutes working on an article or something I was writing. And it occurred to me that I loved writing and I loved teaching. I started teaching during this time and was teaching adjunct courses at a university in Hawaii. And it began to occur to me that this is what made me happy. It wasn't so much the clinical work, although I felt I was pretty good at it and was helpful to a lot of clients. I didn't love it. And that was a bit of an epiphany, and it was hard for me. And I'll never forget sitting with my doctoral supervisor / mentor, I should say postdoctoral supervisor, Captain Betsy Holmes. I'm sitting with her. We're doing our clinical supervision. And I shared with her, hey, Betsy, I think I'd love to be an academician, not a practitioner. And she looks at me and says, of course, that would be a perfect fit for you. That's obvious. And it was such a weight off my shoulder to have a mentor look at me who really knew me and say, yep, I see that. I see that in you too. You need to do that. You'd be great at it. And I just encourage others listening to this to think about what it is you love to do when you have 2 hours off. What is that? And is there some way that you could do that professionally or do more of that? And, give yourself permission to pursue it. That made all the difference for me. And by the way, my mentor was instrumental later in hiring me to the Naval Academy several years later. And that was a game changer for me career-wise. Second thing, make sure that you own your privilege. I'm going to keep this really brief, but it's taken me a long time to recognize as a senior white man, actually a tall white man, I have incredible privilege. And, I've sort of begun to understand this as this hidden knapsack or backpack I've been carrying around my whole life that's opened doors, given me opportunities. This is something I didn't earn, but I have enjoyed the benefits of this. Here's why this is important. It's only when I recognize I carry this knapsack around that I can begin to use it, and use it really deliberately to level the playing field. I think in the case of the work I've been doing in the last decade, level the playing field for women, my female colleagues. I have a lot of capital that I get to share as a senior white male. People look at me at meetings and expect me to speak first, and I can easily say, hey, we should be hearing from Tanya on this because she's the expert. I have so many opportunities every day to share and use my privilege and sponsor people who really should be getting the airtime. So think about that. If you've got any kind of hidden knapsack, which many of us do, think about how you use it. And last thing, nurture an inner core of people, ideally people who don't all look like you, other people in the profession who really trust you, who you trust in turn, and establish some kind of caring community with this inner core of people who will give you feedback when you're getting it wrong, when things are not going well. These are the people who are going to circle the wagons around you. This became really important for me a decade ago when I was diagnosed with a non-cancerous brain tumor, and just going through the stress of the medical diagnosis and the radiation that followed. I was not doing competent work. I wasn't doing a great job teaching. I was, things were falling through the cracks. And it was this inner core of people who circled the wagons around me, gave me the feedback, but also really showed up with a caring orientation that really helped me get through that effectively. And in retrospect, I encourage everyone to be deliberate about thinking about who's that inner core? Who are they going to be? In the case of gender inequity, who are those women, if you're a male, who are going to give you the hard feedback about what you are getting wrong and what you need to be better with? So I'm going to go ahead and leave it there, but those are the things I think I'd like to share with you today.
Well, that's some really good advice, Brad, and I really appreciate you sharing it with us. There is some really good stuff in there for all of us. And again, I'm so glad that you took the time to be with us. Before we go today, I want to give you an opportunity to let people know where they can find you and a little bit more about where to find the book and anything else you'd like to share. What have you got?
I so enjoyed this conversation with you, Randy, but I would say last thing, go out and do a little audit and think about who you're mentoring and sponsoring right now. And if they all look just like you, ask yourself why and think about how you might increase the diversity of the folks that you're working with.
That's a great call to action. I'll mention that the book, which I will give the title one more time, just to make sure that I don't mess it up. Good Guys, How Men Can Become Better Allies for Women in the Workplace. I know for sure that it's available on Amazon and lots of other places, I'm sure. And I hope the audience will take the opportunity to check it out. The brief time that we've had today has made it very clear that you've got a lot of wisdom and a lot of good advice to offer. So I hope people will take advantage of that and pick up the book. And Brad Johnson, thanks again for being with us on Prescription for Success. Thank you so much for joining us today. We'd really appreciate a review from you, and a 5-star rating helps give our podcast much more visibility, and that helps us reach more listeners. Exclusive content is available on our Patreon page, including membership-only material like personal rapid-fire Q&A sessions with our guests. To be sure you never miss an episode, visit our website at rxforsuccesspodcast.com to subscribe. And while you're there, learn how to get CME credit from CMify just by listening. Special thanks to Ryan Jones, who created and performs our theme music. And remember, be sure to fill your prescription for success with my next episode.